Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton and Kim Reuter here with you on Supply Chain Now. Kim, how you doing today?
Fantastic. One of my favorite topics is coming up, so very excited.
Oh, man, we got a great conversation. So glad to have you back. So glad to have everybody here. We got a couple of business leaders we're going to be rolling out in just a second because we got a great show teed up, diving into the wide world of retail. We're going to be exploring dynamic e-commerce and m-commerce trends, as well as some of the shifts taking place that have been taking place, rather, that some are referring to as from click to order to brick and mortar. Hey, if it rhymes, I like it, Kim. Most importantly, we're going to be dialing it in on how logistics leaders must rethink their overall approach to not only take advantage of the current opportunities, but also what they got to do to set their organizations up for longer term success. Kim, should be a good show, huh?
Yes, absolutely. It's the way of the future.
It is, you know what? I would say it's the way of the future, and it's also the way of the now, right?
Yep.
Hey, folks, if you enjoyed today's show, be sure to share it with a friend or your network. They'll be glad you did. Let's get to work. Welcome in our featured guests here today, Wes Arentson, Manager Logistics Sales with SPS Commerce, and Tony Thrasher, Senior Director, Product Management, also with SPS Commerce. Hey, Wes, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. And Tony, how are you doing this morning?
Doing pretty well, Scott. How about yourself?
Wonderful. Great to see you here. Looking forward to a great discussion. Wes has already got all the math figured out just to his right, which I love. All right. So, folks, Kim, Tony, and Wes, let's have a little fun warm-up question, folks. It is National Barbecue Day today. Yes, it is parades from coast to coast. So did you know Thomas Edison is who designed the first charcoal briquette factory back in 1921? And who's the first president, you ask, that had the first barbecue at the White House? That would be Lyndon Baines Johnson from Texas. So here's a question for y'all. And Tony, I'm going to start with you. You strike me as a barbecue connoisseur. What's one item that has to be on your plate of barbecue, right? And where do you get it?
That is a good question. Self-admittedly, I don't know if Minneapolis would be considered a hot spot for barbecue. Like to go south to Kansas City or Austin. For
Right.
I would say I do like a good barbecue. So you're right. Got to be a brisket.
Okay.
Brisket, and then some type of spicier, let's call it, sauce on the side for just slight amount of dipping. So that's on my plate.
Oh, Tony, I love it. Love brisket and the spicy sauce. It's got to be hot. Wes, how about you? What's one thing that's got to be on your plate?
I was going to say brisket too, but since Tony took that, I'm going to go ahead and go with that sausage they always have kind of on the side. That's just icky good. I'm always tempted by that, but brisket would be my go-to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, brisket and sausage, quite a plate you both are making. Folks out there, let us know what's got to be on your barbecue plate and where you get it from. Kim, how about you?
I'm a brisket girl. We actually smoke our own, and I love a brisket and a good coleslaw. Like I think those two go so well together. But yeah, I wish I could pick another barbecue choice, but I just can't. I would be lying. I can't do that.
I love coleslaw too. I thought you were going to say a cold beer because a cold beer goes well with really good barbecue as well. All right, we got a lot to get into here today, Wes, Tony, and Kim. Let's start with some context. Let's set the table a little bit here. So, Wes, if you would, tell us briefly about SPS Commerce and some of your background.
Sure. SPS Commerce really connects businesses across the retail supply chain. We've been doing it for 20 plus years. And really, it's everything. Typically, it's EDI kind of at the core, but it's any way that companies need to be connected, whether that's a retailer sending purchase orders, them sending return documentation, or the 3PL being involved in that, that I know we'll be talking a lot about today. Myself, I've been with SPS for almost 10 years now. I come from a background in WMS prior to that. So I've been in the supply chain for 15 years now and love every minute of it.
Oh, I can tell. I've had a couple of conversations with Wes, and he is passionate about changing how business is done. Love that, Wes. Tony, tell us a little about yourself, if you would.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Scott. Similar to Wes, I've been in this, let's call it the retail supply chain, if you will, for several years, 15 years plus, most of that with SPS Commerce, really focusing on exactly what Wes was framing up, helping the trading partners in this retail supply chain, whether it be a retailer themselves, grocer, distributor, right? Working with the manufacturers, brands that are shipping them products, and then the logistics companies that make it all come together, both third-party warehousers in terms of storage and shipping, and then carrier freight broker parties that are moving the goods. So, been in this space for quite a few years and concentrating obviously on that retail lens.
Yes. So Tony and Wes, Tony especially, really painted, Kim, quite the ecosystem that comes together to make commerce, make business, make success happen. I think we've got a good bit of expertise here, Kim, would you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, if you're in commerce or doing retail in this world today, you have to be considering all channels for selling it, omni-channel, right? So, you guys know I worked at Nordstrom for 4 years, really helping them redefine their supply chain and their technology and how they approach things. And omni-channel was a big part of it. And I was telling a story, right before we started today, was that I had come from Amazon before I started at Nordstrom. Very precise. We know exactly what we have, where it is, barcode scanning, location file, like everything was precise with inventory because that's what it's all about. And then I went to
Yep.
Nordstrom, and they did have one warehouse at the time that had those same policies. But then we got into omni-channel. It blew my mind because inventory moved. Someone could pick up a shirt, take it to a dressing room, but it's still
Yep.
inventory, but we don't know where it is. And so that was kind of a wild ride. And SPS helps with all of these things to make clear communication between all those channels, to make all of this bigger. But it is definitely a challenge out there.
Yes, it is a moving challenge too, as you kind of allude
Hmm.
to. A lot of good stuff there, and I love, Kim, your background for this conversation is going to be great for all of our audience out there. But let's do this. More context. Tony, you are bringing the data and the factoids here today as we look at the growth of e-commerce over the last few years. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. And I'll go back kind of several years on this, and I'm going to bring it to the highlight of the show and the title, even like you're saying, right? The order to brick and mortar. Let's go pre-pandemic. You get this steady growth of e-commerce. We're all very well aware of it, right? And it was, let's say, eating away at the overall share of retail sales relative to in-store purchases.
Hmm.
Right.
You got this steady growth going back, several years, decade or more, whereas, growing, and right at that pandemic level, it was at like a 10, 11% share of overall retail sales. And then you see that immediate spike, which we would all assume took place, right? Like now this spike into that like 17% of total retail sales almost overnight goes to online and goes to e-commerce. And then what's been very interesting coming out of that is it's really been flat post pandemic in terms of the overall share of retail sales. You've seen it kind of stay at that 15, 16% rate. It's still growing, obviously, because retail sales in general is growing, but it's not eating away quite as much on that brick and mortar, sorry. I don't want to say it's a resurgence of brick and mortar, but you can see consumer behavior is certainly willing to get back into the stores. And then Kim, obviously the way you framed it up there, it's the expectation is that e-commerce expectation from a consumer. Folks do want to get back in the store, but they're looking for enriched, let's call them,
Yes.
experiences in the store.
Yes.
So it's just been a very interesting, when you look back at the data, you can see the growth, the spike, and then flatline. So obviously e-commerce is growing, but it's very important to center ourselves in brick and mortar still being the majority, and the brick and mortar, let's call it, resurgence and stabilization of e-commerce share of total retail sales.
Yeah. Well said, Tony. And I think all of us here, because all of us are consumers, obviously, we get out of the pandemic. I couldn't wait to get into stores and touch products again, and
Yeah.
read labels and try to find those enriched experiences that Tony's talking about. That's part of everyday life, right? Interact with people. I mean, it's been great to get back out. Kim, your quick comment as Tony was kind of painting about the spike and kind of a more of a flatter growth curve right now. Kim, your quick thoughts.
So what we're seeing, people are now relying on e-commerce for their everyday things, right? So, grocery, pharmacy, things like that. It's become so ingrained in like everyday life that it's no longer special. So to Tony's point, people are going back to the store for a variety of reasons. Some of them just want human contact, right? They just want to like have an experience with another human. And a lot of it is, there is unsatisfaction when you buy online, especially when you get into like high retail items that have fits and shoes and dresses and things like that. So it's just much better to go to the store. But yeah, people want to go back and have that experience in the store for a variety of reasons. But to Tony's point, we need to have the inventory there and have a robust experience, because what happened early in omnichannel is everything shifted to e-commerce, and then people were going into stores and you don't have my size, you don't have my color, the
Right.
inventory looks weak, things like that. So balance is important.
Great point. All right, let's keep driving. Let's get setting the table a bit more. So, Tony, let's talk about m-commerce, mobile commerce, and how it's been surfacing and growing and playing a bigger role in how consumers are shopping.
Yeah, so just quick definition on that m-commerce, really mobile commerce. It's more or less a subset of e-commerce, but what's being done on mobile devices. The stat recently that kind of spurred this as a topic to discuss is 60% of e-commerce sales is mobile commerce, and you would expect that to continue to grow. I mean, me personally, like I've got to be like 99%. I'm doing it all on my phone, so I'm definitely tipping that 60% up. And I'm sure many of you are as well. And then also you look at the trend and the anticipation of the trend of some of these, like, let's call it live stream shopping experiences that are starting
Yes.
to emerge on all these social platforms. You've got Instagram and TikTok taking advantage of how they can kind of get in here as a channel. And you would just expect, as the generations go through, that type of shopping is going to grow, and that would be a contributor likely to the m-commerce trend as well. So just an important piece to continue to keep our eyes on. It's just
Right.
to understand its kind of share of e-commerce.
Tony, good stuff there. If I heard you right, 60% of all key e-commerce right now is driven by m-commerce. Did I hear that stat right, Tony?
Correct.
Which makes perfect sense, as this just becomes continuing to be an extra appendage in so many people's hands, right? And we want to be able to do things easy and convenient without breaking out our laptop or whatever, cranking up the PC. Good stuff there. All right, Wes, question for you: to handle all of these trends and shifts that Tony's talking about and the growth, no matter what channel, this ever changing customer expectations, we're looking for new experiences. What are you seeing from successful third party warehouses in terms of strategies, processes, tech to be able to capitalize and deliver?
My role, I'm talking to 3PLs all day long. So typically they've got a warehouse, they're holding goods for, somebody shipping e-commerce or maybe bulk to a warehouse. I think what we're seeing is a push into more automation. I think for a long time, 3PLs were focused on, hey, I've got racking, I can fit boxes. I want to be flexible, because you never know what client's going to come through your door the next day. But I think increasingly,
Right.
not only from a technology perspective, we're starting to see some robotics help with pick as e-com. You've got these onesie, twosie picks, really a focus on how can we optimize that, make it more efficient. We know margins are thin. So how can we try to just push and push to make sure we're more and more efficient? And then I think, really focus on flexibility, because as we've talked so far, there was a big shift to e-commerce, and now it's, like today's title, the pendulum swinging back a little bit. So it's really the ability to handle everything, because you never know what customer is coming through your door and where that customer, as they grow, what channels they're going to get into. Because if you can't support that as their warehouse, they're going to go elsewhere, because it's hard to have two different 3PLs managing two different sets of inventory. That creates all sorts of challenges. So being a successful warehouse in this industry is really being able to handle all the requirements quickly and navigating that environment.
Well said, Wes. Everyone talks about agile, and so many folks talk about it from a very cliche way. But Wes, you're talking about it in real practical terms, because you've got to be flexible, agile enough to grow and evolve and flex with your customers as they find new ways and new twists of how to meet the customer where they want it and create revenue and create value. Kim, what'd you hear there between Tony's kind of level setting of some of the trends taking place, and Wes was describing what 3PLs, 3PWs, you name it, how they're evolving to handle it?
So they go hand in hand, right? So not too long ago, like you talked about warehouse and you talked about retail, and they weren't really connected, right? Like stuff came from a warehouse and you put it in a retail store. But now we have, with this whole omni-channel and people shopping on mobile, people are pre-shopping on their mobile before they go to the store. I mean, they're literally standing on the sidewalk. Do they have what I want in here before I actually go in? We're going in the store, they see a product, we don't have it. We're going to ship it to you from a warehouse. Like all of this, it's one big solution. You cannot think about them separately now because
Mm.
the shopping experience, even though we're talking about people going back and having retail experiences, are they buying why they're in there? Because there's the experience part and then there's the buying part. So they are not always connected. Or they go and they have experience. You don't have what I have. Make that customer happy. We're going to ship it to you overnight. You'll have it tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. That's where the warehouse comes in. So those two experiences are no longer separated. They are 100% linked.
Love that, Kim. I'll tell you, we're big Costco fans, as any of our listeners know. My son just got a smartphone. He's going to be in Costco soon because I've already seen it. He's going to have his clipboard. He's going to have his phone. He's going to be double checking prices to see where his best deal on comic books or whatever else is.
Yeah.
It's just the age we live in.
Mhm.
All right. So I want to shift over. This next, we got a lot more good stuff to get to. And folks, we want to hear from you. What are you seeing out there as a consumer, as a practitioner? What are some of your favorite brands doing? Hey, what are some of your thoughts here? So Wes, I got several questions for you as we talk about successful outcome producing partnerships for companies that are looking to capitalize on this massive opportunity out there. So this first question for you, when it comes to finding the right partner to deliver, what are some of the best questions to ask potential partners, Wes?
Yeah, if I'm a brand looking for a warehouse to partnership or partner with, a lot of what I'm asking is around scale, their ability to grow with me. Because, like we alluded to before, the last thing you want to do is make the huge investment to get all your product into a warehouse, only to find out when you get into TikTok shop or when you get into a new e-com channel, they're not able to support it. And suddenly you have to revisit that whole conversation. So I think that's the first one is, where are your capabilities around scaling into future channels, whether that be brick and mortar or e-commerce, and really a flexibility across the board. And then I think,
Yep.
some of the more operational questions around, resourcing and service levels, all that's going to be important because it plays into that overall experience that you're trying to keep with your brand to ensure that, your warehouse is meeting those deadlines. They're able to produce. They're not going to have delays unnecessarily because, as we've alluded to, consumers are expecting goods in a couple days. When I see something that ships to me and it gets there in 5-7 days, that sometimes that's an extra click to go see if somebody else can get it to me a little faster.
Right. Excellent point. Kim, you heard a lot of things to ask about there from Wes. What was one of your things that may be overlooked when it comes to due diligence with potential partners?
So one, I think, can you support me for the future is always a big question, right? I deal with a lot of odd size stuff because, the industries that I support now aren't normal, which is what makes them so fun. But the one thing I always look at is the integration and how long is it going to take us to integrate? How long is it going to get us to set up? Like, what kind of hoops are we going to have to jump through, to make this happen? Because in some cases, if those aren't handled well, those are big consumers of time and money. So those are the things I look for.
Excellent point, Kim. You're doing some foreshadowing because we're going to talk more about integration and onboarding here in a second. Wes, next question when it comes to put these successful partnerships at work in place, streamlining that customer experience to take the friction out is critical, right? I wish we all lived in a more frictionless world, right? But hey, we're making gains. We're making gains. What's your approach specifically at SPS Commerce when it comes to partnerships, Wes?
Yeah, I mean, we're working both with the brand and the warehouse. I mean, that's part of why we've structured things in a way that we have specific teams focused on each of those different areas. And that's because
Yep.
each one, even though they're part of that same retail ecosystem, each one has very specific nuances that we have to account for. So the great thing is when we work with that brand, we work with the warehouse, we have a relationship with that retailer, we can look at that overall process and build something that's not only repeatable, but we're working with all parties in tandem. Because as we know, when you've got 3, 4, 5 different parties involved in these projects, that's a lot to keep track of. So you need a good process to do it. But it's also helpful when all of them are engaged and we can work together to try to, produce an outcome that makes sense for everybody in a timeline that makes sense. Because to Kim's point, the onboarding timeline, getting these new channels up and running, that's real money for brands and for warehouses to be able to ship the product and really meet the needs of their customers where they are, because you can't see a new trend and then 6 months later you're like, great, we have the integration live. Now let's go capital. It's gone. There's something new by then.
Yes, Wes, I love that. I'm gonna go back and Tony, I see you're shaking your head a lot at what agreeing with Wes. Going back to the first part of his response around repeatability, right? Building something that you can, I'll take simplicity where we can find it. And when we can find something that works where you can rinse and repeat, there is immense value there because that is something you can scale with, which is an earlier comment both of y'all making. Tony, quick comment, anything there about the SPS commerce approach or repeatability? Quick comment from you, Tony.
I love the concept of repeatability. And I often say that retailer by retailer, and you would see this in like the e-commerce channels too, which is going to be much more similar to more of like a drop ship. I'm shipping to consumer on behalf of a retailer type of fulfillment model. When you get into working with a retailer, they are, you know, there's repeatability. There's like 85% similarities, but there's that nuance that will get people. So you want to harness that repeatability, but then you also have to respect the nuance.
Yes.
Balance is extremely important.
Tony, love it. Respect the nuance. It sounds like a Seinfeld episode, doesn't it? Tony, Wes, and Kim. All right. So, Wes, onboarding. We've touched on that a couple different times. Optimizing that new customer onboarding can make a massive impact on outcomes and results and taking friction out. What's your advice when it comes to onboarding, Wes?
I mean, I think that all boils down to process. You got to have something in place with all parties involved, that everybody agrees on, that's documented, that you can follow again and again. Because as we go through these integrations, each one's, to Tony's point, has nuances, but the overall process needs to be defined, because there's nothing worse than trying to reinvent the wheel each time you come up with a new integration with a new e-commerce channel. You have to have some of that put in place, and that takes a lot of work on the front end, but it really allows the warehouse or the brand to take that and run with it without having to start from scratch each time, and look at it as its own individual project versus, sort of a larger process that, okay, cool, a new channel, let's just put that into the normal workflow, and get the teams engaged.
Good stuff there, Wes. Good stuff. Kim, comes to onboarding. Anything that Wes shared there, what would you call out for folks to really take away from that response?
So I kind of the same thing I tell people all the time is that, technology is great, but kind of what West Chest too, it's about the process and about your business processes and about your data. I see a lot of companies, they go like, oh, we got new software. It's great, everything. And then they have the same problems over and over again because their business processes weren't documented solid before they got into this whole thing. So to Wes's point, it's really about process at that point when you're doing integrations with a customer.
Yes, 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 yes. Respect the nuance. I love that, Tony. Sorry. All right. So let's go to this, Kim, Tony, and Wes. Complexity, folks, is thriving in this current environment. And you could argue it always has. It goes with the territory, right? Supply chain, global supply chain is not for the faint of heart. But I want to walk through a few proven ways, Wes and Tony, that business leaders can untangle that complexity to decomplexify. Is that a word? And be better prepared to work with any retailer. And that last phrase is really important,
Hmm.
right? Because there's a lot of common demands from all retailers, and then there can be some nuances, right? So, Tony, we got 4 ways I think we're going to walk through here. What's the first one, Tony?
I think the first one starts with the item, which is the product, the piece of inventory that we as consumers are actually purchasing. What we see is it's very common for us to be in relationships and partnerships with third party warehouse providers that are, let's say, they were in a e-commerce setting and then they're now also transitioning into this, to go to Wes's point, and agile, more flexible, maybe business environment, probably getting pushed there by their current customer base to also start getting into wholesale retail shipping, which is a little bit more when we say that kind of just, singular retail term. And the complexities that come at the item level when you get into that is just something that's very important to, again, respect. Is you're going to have packaging detail at the item level that could now potentially be dictated to you by a retailer through what they're trying to accomplish with that particular brand. There might even be a new SKU, an exclusive type of a SKU that's now being sold into a particular retailer. Not just assuming you're going to be able to take what you're doing at the even item level shipping e-commerce and just lift and shift that to that wholesale. Obviously, now you're shipping pallets. Retailers are going to have some different ways that they want that demonstrated. And we'll get into some more of those here in a bit. But starting at that item level, very important, and unpacking any differences that might be taking there with your brand or your customer, which would be the brand or the merchant, as well as any other partners that you have to help you do that.
Yep. Well said. And there's new worlds of item level visibility these days that we've got to take advantage of. Kim, I'm going to come to you after I get the second of four ways we can decomplexify out there. Tony, what would that be?
So the second one is what would be referred to as most retailers as their vendor guide.
Yep.
And I'll get into some concepts that might be a little bit more SPS-y, if you will. That is so important to appreciate. You have multiple different fulfillment models that most retailers are going to support. Drop ship to distribution center in both cross dock or more referred to as just kind of a pure bulk. Maybe it's a ship to store model. So each retailer has that nuance. And then there's nuances inside, even oftentimes at the, let's call it product or item category as
Right.
well. First and foremost, you've got to understand what's being expected of you, both as a brand or a merchant from that retailer within each fulfillment model and how you're doing business with them. And then if you're, imagine now you're a third party warehouse provider that has multiple brands, each of which are shipping into multiple retailers. It's not too difficult to do the math and see now the complexity that you're dealing with as a third party logistics provider. Unpacking that vendor guide. And some of these are, we're talking hundreds of pages long, right? So, and that's a little bit some of that SPSE concept where we're really taking some of complexity away and helping our partners on all sides of the fence understand what it actually matters, what matters to them. And Kim, I'm going to riff off of what you said because we didn't plant that terminology with you, and we use the same thing. But the business process is not just the technology changes; it's the appreciation of the evolution of your business process. What does it now look like if I have to go and book freight through Target, for example, where previously I was in control of my own freight strategy?
Yeah.
Very important example.
Yeah.
Excellent point. Kim, your comment there on the first two ways we can decomplexify out there.
Yeah, item data is key. Everything is driven off item data now. Rules are going off item data. Almost all decisions in an e-commerce order or omni-channel order are coming off item data. Where is it? How much do we have? How can I ship it? Is it hazmat? Where can I ship it? There are even states that we can't sell stuff into. So there's the California laws. We have to restrict stuff by state. So item data is big. Unfortunately, when you get into a big integration with an SPS or a big upgrade, you soon discover that there isn't a lot of product data all in the same database. And there's a lot of what I call tribal knowledge, right? You have that one person who's like, oh, no, you can't do that with that one. And you're like, yeah, well, we need to be able to have a flag for that and not just have to call
Right.
you. Everything that Wes said is the item data and having that clean, understanding what it means and having it completely filled out, I guess is the word I'm looking for, is absolutely
Yes.
crucial.
And I would add, as Tony mentioned, knowing what's in the vendor guides. It could be 100 pages, could be 200 pages, but knowing what we got to do and how we'll be measured in terms of performance. Excellent point. I love the work you are doing there to make that easier. All right, I got two more things, one from Tony, one from Wes. So Tony, we got the third way of how we can decomplexify out there. Your thoughts?
Next one, and this was one that we run across just in the forefront of the conversation. It's the shipping requirements that are now going to be oftentimes retailer driven. And the most tactical, I think, an obvious one to gravitate to there is going to be the labeling requirements, right? Like I'm shipping pallets. Some retailers are going to require a pallet level and a box level label to automate some of the receivables on their side. You know, some of them just want it at the box or the carton level. Some of them just want the pallet. So again, that's important. Ties back to that item. You got to know what you're shipping and how that connects to that vendor guide and that requirement. But again, that kind of falls into that same state is, you know, retailers have generally similar labeling requirements. You got to get it right. And you got to have a high quality on the label. You know, it's just, we all too often you have a poor quality label and you're going to get dinged on it. And oftentimes you're not going to find out until that first, you know, chargeback or ding from your retailer. And then you're going to check and make sure and improve for the future. And you just want to shorten that learning time.
Labels are not trivial, as we all know here today. All right, Wes, we got a fourth way, and we were talking about integrations earlier in the conversation. I think we're going to touch on that with this fourth way of decomplexifying, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the last one is integrating those orders into your WMS in a way that's, again, repeatable. We know that the WMS for any third-party warehouse, it's the lifeblood of their operation. So I think oftentimes we're surprised how often these organizations are hand keying things still, or, the complexity is too much. You get a new customer, they bring out a bunch of channels. They don't have a process for that. Suddenly it's a bunch of people logging into portals and pulling data and then, typing that into their WMS. So one of the things that we always push and would recommend for any company is let's figure out how to get that into your WMS in a repeatable way, because it's just not scalable to be running that manually. I know that's obvious. I don't think that's news to anybody. It's really doing the work on the front end to ensure if we get a new client, regardless of their capabilities, the first thing we're doing is integrating that, regardless of order volume, regardless of, channels, because then we know as they grow, if they get a huge spike, we're not shut down because not suddenly we got somebody spending 60 hours inputting orders just because somebody had a great product that did well.
Love that. The immense value of integrations. Kim, I'm going to get your comment, but first, Wes, I'm so glad we made it this far without sine, cosine, or tangent making its way to the conversation. I had a math nightmare for a second there. All right. So Kim, we were just talking about 4 ways, right?
Mhm.
Tony shared 3. Wes touched on, of course, WMS integrations in particular. Your final thought when it comes to decomplexifying before we move to tech stack considerations.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you guys called out labels because when you're working with one of these big integrations, like the last thing you think about are labels, and no pun intended, it's oddly sticky when you get to labels, like whose name's going to be, it becomes so complex. And it's the one thing you never really think about when you're doing one of these big integrations. You're like, this little 3x4 is going to make my life hell. And they do. So I'm glad that we called that out because they are very important. And the order management integration is absolutely key. And I want to put a little perspective on like what these warehouses are dealing with, these 3PLs. So they may have, 100, 200 different customers in some of these bigger 3PLs. Every brand, every customer has a different shipping requirement, a different SLA, a different box size, packaging requirements, virtual bundling, kitting. Like all of these things are happening in one single warehouse. And that is the complexity that, we have to solve for because it is not, the old days of like, this is a Walmart warehouse and this is a Target warehouse, and this is an Amazon warehouse, and this is all they do are gone. And these 3PLs have to, and every single customer has their requirements, and they're not going to be happy if you didn't meet them. It can even get down to like things like some require 24-hour shipping, some require 48-hour shipping. Like, and how do you manage your WMS and your order management systems to make your warehouse efficient, right? So how do you
Yes.
prioritize and things like that? So it's massively complex. And I just want to paint that picture for people who may not be familiar about what's going on inside that box. It's crazy.
So you better know all that stuff that Kim just dropped, and you better partner with the right folks. And I
Mhm.
bet Wes and Tony would welcome a conversation, is my hunch.
Mhm.
All right, Wes, we talk about this all the time. I feel if I've been talking about anything, one of the things, a little on the short list, it is building out your tech stack. Do we do it internally, do it yourself mode, or you take the third party approach? What are some of your thoughts there, Wes, for business leaders looking to make that decision?
Yeah, I think it's, across your tech stack, there's a ton of different decisions in terms of different pieces of this. I'll speak to
Right.
our lane, because I think you could have a whole separate conversation around building your own WMS and that type of thing. But from our
Right.
perspective, oftentimes when I get a call, it's somebody who had a customer come along, they needed to build something, they built it. Now that works great until you start looking at what Kim was talking about, where you have 2 customers, you got 3, they have 12 different channels they're shipping to. And suddenly you have this web of, different connections that, so-and-so built that knows how to fix it when it goes down. But then we're getting back to that knowledge that only one person has. And so I think it's really looking long-term. I mean, I think for, if you have a one customer with one order channel, sure, you can build it yourself. I think that is totally fair. I think it's looking longer term to say, not just today, but 5 years from now, I don't just want to have one customer with one order channel. I expect them to grow. I expect to bring more customers on. I don't want to be in the business of building integrations with e-commerce channels or retailer channels. Core competency as a warehouse is pick, packing, and shipping in within the four walls. So I would look at making sure you're focusing on where we can drive efficiency in there, because at the end of the day, that's the area that has the biggest impact on your customers. It has the biggest impact on your bottom line. Is the things you do in there, let somebody else handle, all the other nuances that come along with that. And that's really, our message. I'm not going to go say a blanket statement that it's always right to outsource it,
Right.
but I think that complexity as you go forward, just not really sustainable to have a team driving that.
Excellent point, Wes. Kim, you raised your finger, I think, to make a point.
Oh boy. So this is the conversation I've had with a lot of companies about, do you build it yourself or do you outsource it? And a lot of times, and I say the same thing Wes just said, what is your core competency? Is your core competency tech or is your core competency selling designer clothes? You need to decide. But what happens is a lot of time the tech department gets involved and they see opportunities to further themselves, to better their skill set, to make themselves more marketable, whatever their thing is. And some of it is, they do think that they can do it better, but they just simply don't have the skills.
Yes.
And that's a really hard conversation to have with companies and to get them to do the right thing. And I have seen companies make the wrong decision. And, 4 or 5 years later, we're still trying to figure out that TIPCO engine. And sales are just, we're 17% cancel rate,
Right.
customers are rate. So it is a big consideration, but I think the core question every time is this your core competency? If you're going to have to hire up a team to build this technology, the answer is no.
Excellent points there. And Wes, going back, I know we got a bunch of Twins fans here on the show today. And as a Braves fan, that 1991 World Series pains me to no end. And yes, Ken Herbeck did pull Ron Gant off first base, but I digress. Wes, folks got to determine if they're going to be Kirby Puckett or Jack Morris, right? Are you going to be a Hall of Fame outfielder or are you going to be a Hall of Fame pitcher? It's a fun analogy to make. But Wes, that's kind of, you're picking your business. Where do you want to specialize, right, Wes?
100%. Yeah. And I think the companies that have a really good focus on that are the companies that do well. They're not trying to be everything to everybody. They're trying to say, this is what I do well. I pull in really, really smart people to do the other things. I partner with smart companies to do the other things, to ensure that none of that focus gets taken away. I think Tony will attest to this. I think SPS has done a nice job of that, really focusing on what we do well. And we want to partner with companies that do the same and be that resource to them so that we can take this off their plate and really allow them to thrive.
Yes. SPSC. What did you say earlier, Tony? SPSC or SPSEs or something like that. What? I'm trying to learn your lingo.
Just adding a Y.
Well, but Tony, you'd probably agree, right? As we make this last point before we make sure we get y'all connected, we got some resources to share with folks, a few other things. Tony, we got to pick it. We got to determine and pick our spots and figure out what we want to be when we grow up, especially as an organizational standpoint. Any other thoughts you want to add to this do it ourselves or outsource it conversation, Tony?
I completely agree. Kim, I appreciate your perspective on it big time, right? Like it's right in the way I think that we look at it. And just like Wes was saying too, like we're also not trying to be everything to everybody either. We're very focused on what we're good at and how we help our customers. And then obviously we have a partner network where we help our customers beyond just what we do, knowing the other folks that are very good at what they do.
And Tony, I would have used that baseball analogy for the Brewers. I would have used Hank Aaron, but what all-time pitching great with the Brewers should I use for that analogy, Tony?
Oh boy.
Pick your favorite and we'll tackle it before we go here today. But Hank Aaron, of course, played for the Milwaukee Braves and then later the Atlanta Braves. Incredible home run king for sure. All right, Tony, Wes, and Kim. I really wish we had a couple more hours here. I'm fascinated with not only what's going on out in the commerce world, e-commerce, m-commerce, you name it, but some of the cool things y'all are both up to and what industry-leading organizations are doing to do it well, to do it profitably, and do it successfully in a way that we can scale, right, and grow the business. For folks that want to grab a brisket and a beer or a cup of coffee and have a talk shop with either of y'all. Let's make sure folks can connect. So starting with you, Wes, how can folks connect with you?
I think LinkedIn's the best way. Would love to connect, whether you're warehouse or a brand. If you have interest in, talking more about how we might work together, we'd love to chat.
Okay. You heard the invite from Wes. You'll be one click away in just a second. Tony Thrasher, how about you? How can folks track you down, talk baseball, talk supply chain, talk e-commerce? How can folks connect with you, Tony?
I'm same as Wes here. LinkedIn is a great way of reaching out. Feel free to connect. Feel free to reach out. Always love to broker a time and have a quick Zoom. I think that makes it super easy and yet personal to drive that network connection. And then, we're out there a lot of these supply chain stores or shows as well. So if Wes and I aren't there, you look for an SPS Commerce booth on the trade show circuit, if you will. Stop by, say hi.
Outstanding. Is there one coming up right around the corner y'all want to mention, Tony or Wes, or folks should go through your LinkedIn and connect that way? How about that?
Yeah, and I know in the fall, Wes and I will probably be at CSCMP. That's one we always like to go to. So if folks on this call might be attending that, look for us there. So yeah.
Excellent organization. CSCMP has been on the move for sure. Okay, so Kim, I'm going to share a couple of resources from Wes and Tony and the team, and then I'm going to come back and get your patented key takeaway. I got a feeling, folks, we should be hanging on to our socks because Kim's going to let us have it here in a second. All right, let's share a couple resources here. I love when great folks like Tony and Wes bring us some things where we can continue the conversations. And by the way, speaking of continuing the conversations, connect with Wes and Tony on LinkedIn so we can continue the dialogue for sure. Folks, you want to learn more about SPS Commerce for 3PLs? Well, you're in luck. We've got a great landing page here. You can learn a lot more about what they do to make things easy, take friction out, and drive that scale and success in your organization. So check out that link. And we're talking labels a lot. Don't sleep on labels, folks. If you're looking for GS1 labels, good news, SPS Commerce can help. Okay, while we still have Tony and Wes, Kim, I cannot wait to hear your favorite takeaway from these two business leaders' perspectives here today. What is it, Kim? Lay it on us.
The biggest takeaway here is the item data. And I know it is not sexy. It is not what people want to talk about, but it's the bricks that you use for the foundation of your business. And if you have crappy bricks, you're going to have a crappy business. That's just the end of it. So, that's the key thing. If anyone is walking away from this and they're considering, an SPS software solution, you have to make sure that you're starting with the right data. And no matter how good your software is, no matter who you use, there's tons of companies out there. It's not going to be good if you don't have good business processes. And I think that's why SPS has been really successful in the space because they focus on that.
That's right. That is right. Build your house, your organization not on shifting sand, build on a strong foundation that can support that growth. Excellent point, Kim. What was that phrase? If you use crappy bricks, you're going to have a crappy highly scientific and technical talk here as always. Hey, I love that been there, done it perspective that all three of y'all brought here today. Really enjoyed it. I want to thank our distinguished guests here, Wes Arentson, again, Manager Logistics Sales with SPS Commerce. Wes, thanks for being here.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
It sure was. I really enjoyed it. Tony Thrasher, Senior Director, Product Management with SPS Commerce. Tony, great to chat here today.
Likewise. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Kim, always a pleasure. Really appreciate you being here as well.
Thank you.
All right, folks, connect with our friends Tony and Wes here. Check out those resources we dropped. But most importantly, hey, do business differently. They dropped a ton of great, very actionable ideas that you can implement. I would say many of them straight away, right after the show, right? Connect with them, have the chat, find out other ways that they can help make change and success happen easier. Your team's ready for it, right? Mm-hmm. Deeds, not words. I'm just on you to take that first step. With all that said, hey, on behalf of our entire team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton challenging you, do good, give forward, be the change. And we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.